Next story. The map was accurate. In late September, a folded trail map showed up on the counter at the Forks Ranger Station in Washington, damp and grit-stained. The hand-drawn lines on it were precise, like someone copied them slowly from a better source. A note on the back read, "Take the west spur, then trust the creek," written in careful block letters. Dispatch logs later recorded that the map was logged as found property, then filed without a name. 34-year-old Caleb Vance worked seasonal maintenance for the park, and he took extra shifts when trails flooded. He told coworkers he wanted one quiet overnight to test a new pack and clear his head. He signed out a radio, a small shovel, and a standard first aid pouch from the station cage. State records show his personal phone stopped pinging near the Hoh River corridor that same afternoon. 2 days later, Ranger Elise Harrow drove out from Port Angeles for a routine compliance sweep, age 41 and 12 years on the job. She was assigned missing person support before, and she kept notes like a courtroom clerk. She asked about Caleb and checked the sign-out sheet, which had his name and a return date. Reportedly, she also asked about the found map because one volunteer remembered the odd message. The sign-in board at the trailhead showed Caleb's signature, time-stamped by a weathered pen tied to string. The next line belonged to a couple from Tacoma, but they wrote they stayed on the main path. Rain came down steady that evening, and a wind advisory pushed branches across the lower miles. County file from 2009 described the same pattern, storms that hide footprints within minutes. Investigators never confirmed whether Caleb carried the found map, but the station drawer was suddenly empty. Search teams began with the basics: grid lines, dog runs, and checking the river bends where slip falls happen. Dispatch logs noted Elise requested a helicopter only after ground teams found no gear at common rest points. On day 3, an archived notes packet from a prior case was pulled because the missing route looked familiar. Some locals claimed a side creek lured tired hikers off trail, but records conflict on which creek it was. Elise wrote that the found map might be a deliberate guide, not a casual doodle. The first hard clue arrived as a radio transmission, weak and clipped, picked up after midnight by the station repeater. The voice said, "It's accurate, I'm where it says," and then static swallowed the rest. A technician later wrote the signal strength was too low to triangulate and weather interference was heavy. Still, the phrase matched the title Elise gave her incident log entry, map accurate, possible contact. Investigators never confirmed the voice was Caleb's because the recording distorted vowel sounds. The next hour produced nothing but open carrier bursts and silence. Elise returned to the trailhead at dawn with one deputy from Clallam County, age 52, and trained in backcountry recovery. They followed the main trail until a shallow tributary crossed it. Then they watched for cut marks or broken ferns. About a mile past the last clear marker, they found a strip of orange flagging tied to a cedar limb. State records show Caleb used the same flagging on work crews because he kept a roll in his pack. The flagging pointed toward thicker brush, in a direction not listed on official maps. Elise noted the tie was clean, like a deliberate breadcrumb, not storm litter. The brush opened into a narrow drainage where water ran over black stones and the air smelled like wet iron. Along the bank, someone had stacked 3 flat rocks into a small cairn, then scratched a line in the mud beside it. The scratch looked like a crude arrow, but rain had softened its edges and made it uncertain. Reportedly, Elise photographed it and measured the cairn height because she treated patterns as evidence. The deputy said the cairn reminded him of a case in 2011 where a missing hunter followed similar markers. Records conflict on whether that earlier hunter ever returned because reports list him as both found and unresolved. They pushed upstream until the creek narrowed, then widened suddenly into a gravel bar shaped like a shallow bowl. In the center sat Caleb's shovel, handle snapped, with fresh wood showing under the wet bark stain. Nearby, his radio lay face down, battery door missing, as if it had been torn away. Dispatch logs show the radio never sent a distress code, even though it was issued with an emergency button. Elise wrote that the items were placed, not dropped, because they were too clean of silt for that waterline. The deputies searched for boot prints, but the gravel was churned by rain and animal tracks. Back at the station, Elise asked the volunteer to describe the found map again, and she requested the evidence locker log. The clerk produced a photocopy made on the day it arrived because the original had gone missing from the drawer. The photocopy showed a west spur marked in red ink, leading to a bend in the creek shaped like a hook. There was also a box labeled Safe Shelf drawn near a rock face with a short ladder symbol beside it. Archived notes from 2009 mentioned a rock shelter locals called The Shelf, but investigators never confirmed its location. Some locals claimed it was used by bootleggers long ago, though no state records support that claim. Elise took the photocopy and compared it to terrain scans, then chose a search corridor that matched the creek hook. A drone team flew the section and found a dark seam in a cliff band, partially hidden by hemlock branches. When ground teams arrived, they found a narrow ledge with old rope fragments and a rusted eye bolt drilled into stone. The rope was brittle, and state records could not date it accurately due to rot and contamination. On the ledge sat a clear plastic box, sealed tight with condensation inside like it had been there recently. The box contained dry matches, a cheap compass, and a notebook wrapped in wax paper. The notebook held only 4 pages of writing, each line pressed hard as if the pen was failing. Caleb's name appeared once, but investigators never confirmed he wrote it because the sample was too short. The last page said, "Map was accurate, shelf is real, someone else knew I was coming," and then the ink trailed off. Reportedly, Elise read the line aloud to the deputy, then stopped because the sentence implied intent by another person. Dispatch logs show she requested additional units not for rescue, but for scene security and evidence control. Records conflict on how long the box had been on the ledge because condensation can form from weather shifts alone. Still, the matches were dry, which suggested recent handling in that wet climate. That night, a second radio transmission hit the repeater, shorter than before, and the words were almost the same. The voice said, "Don't follow the lines," and then a sharp click ended the signal. Investigators never confirmed whether the click was a button release, a battery disconnect, or a recording splice. A county technician documented the audio file chain of custody because archived notes warned about hoax calls during high-profile searches. Some locals claimed they heard a man shouting near the river, but those statements were never consistent on time or direction. Elise wrote one sentence in her report, "The map may be bait, accuracy may be the trap." Caleb Vance was never located, and state records still list the case as missing in the Olympic Peninsula region. Next story. The clearing was new. In late October, a call came in to the Shasta County Dispatch Center from hikers near Redding, California. They reported a man who walked into the timber alone, then never came back to the trailhead parking area. Dispatch logs later noted his name as Daniel Rourke, 29, a graduate student taking photos for a thesis. State records showed he had reserved a cheap motel room, then asked staff about quiet trails with no crowds. Daniel arrived at a forest access point east of town just after sunrise on a Monday. He carried a day pack, a camera bag, and a paper map, folded like it had been studied repeatedly. A store clerk later told investigators he bought water, jerky, and a small roll of bright flagging tape. Archived notes said he mentioned a rare woodpecker he hoped to document before migrating south. By mid-afternoon, Daniel's car was still parked, and the motel never heard from him again. A friend back in Oregon texted him until the messages stopped delivering, then called local authorities. Reportedly, cell coverage in that region dropped quickly once the road curved past the last ranch gate. County file from 2009 described the same coverage issues during an earlier missing hiker search. The search assignment landed with Ranger Melissa Klein, 34, a seasonal ranger nearing her final week. She had worked wildfire seasons, then shifted into patrol work because she liked quiet procedural routines. She met Daniel's friend at the ranger station, took a statement, and asked about Daniel's usual habits. Records conflict on whether Daniel had wilderness experience, though his friend insisted he had backpacked often. Melissa drove to the trailhead and started with the simplest facts: time, weather, and probable direction of travel. The parking area held only Daniel's sedan, and a thin line of dust suggested no vehicle had moved recently. She found a boot print near the start sign, then several more prints where the trail narrowed into Manzanita. Dispatch logs show she requested a second unit, plus a volunteer tracker to help read ground sign. The volunteer was Nora Bates, 41, a former EMT who had joined searches after a family member vanished years earlier. Nora arrived with a small day pack, a compass, and a calm voice that stayed level under pressure. Melissa explained the last known point and the timeline, then the two walked slowly beyond the first mile marker. They moved with long pauses, scanning for broken twigs, scuffed soil, or any fresh disturbance in leaf litter. About 2 miles in, they found the first deliberate marker, a strip of bright tape tied high on a pine branch. The tape looked new, and it fluttered in a steady breeze that carried the smell of dry needles. Nora noted the knot style, then said the tape was probably placed by someone who expected to return this way. Investigators never confirmed whether Daniel used that tape, but the purchase receipt later matched the brand. The markers continued for several hundred yards, spaced in a way that suggested careful planning. Then, the trail broke into multiple game paths, and the tape guided them away from the official route. Melissa radioed their position, then logged the deviation in her field notebook for later reconstruction. Some locals claimed the area held illegal hunting camps, though state records contained no recent citations nearby. They pushed through dense brush and reached a place that did not appear on Melissa's map. A clearing opened up with straight edges, as if the trees had been removed in a hurry. The ground was flattened, and pale soil showed through the needles like it had been scraped clean. Nora crouched and said the clearing felt fresh, since no young shoots had started to reclaim the exposed dirt. Melissa walked the perimeter and counted steps, trying to estimate size without exaggerating the description. Near the center sat a ring of stones, but the stones were arranged too evenly for a casual campfire. There was no ash, no soot, and no smell of smoke, which made the ring look more like a placeholder. Archive notes later compared the stones to old survey markers, yet investigators never confirmed an official purpose. On the west edge, Nora found a second strip of tape, torn and pressed into a crack in a stump. Under it was a shallow impression in the dirt, shaped like the corner of a camera case. Melissa photographed everything, then recorded the compass bearings and distances to 3 nearby trees. She also noted a faint drag mark, though records conflict on whether it was human-made or animal sign. They searched outward in slow circles, calling Daniel's name at set intervals, then stopping to listen. The only response was wind in the canopy and the occasional tapping sound from distant birds. Nora spotted a single footprint at the clearing's southern border, then watched it vanish where soil turned rocky. Melissa radioed for a K-9 team, and dispatch logs show the request was marked urgent at 4:18 p.m. The K-9 handler arrived at dusk, and the dog pulled hard toward the clearing, then stopped abruptly. The handler later said the dog acted confused, circling, then sitting, as if scent had ended suddenly. Investigators never confirmed if that behavior meant a clean pickup by vehicle or simple scent scatter in shifting wind. State records show temperatures dropped quickly that night, which could have reduced scent strength across exposed ground. Melissa and Nora returned the next morning with more volunteers and a deputy from the county sheriff office. They laid out a grid and moved in lines, each person spaced far enough to avoid stepping on fresh evidence. Half a mile east, a volunteer found Daniel's water bottle upright with no dirt inside the threads. Reportedly, it looked placed rather than dropped, but investigators never confirmed intent or who set it there. The deputy collected the bottle in a bag, then noted no obvious tooth marks or cracking. A separate team found a camera lens cap near a fallen log, and it matched Daniel's camera model. Melissa marked the coordinates and asked dispatch to document every find with timestamps and collector names. County file from 2009 recommended strict chain of custody after earlier searches had been criticized for sloppy handling. By the third day, the search expanded to include old logging spurs and abandoned service roads. Nora interviewed hunters at a pullout, and one man said he saw a lone hiker walking fast at noon. He described a red flannel shirt, and Daniel had packed one, though many hikers in that region wore similar clothing. Records conflict on the direction described, since the hunter later changed his statement during a follow-up call. Melissa requested aerial support, and a helicopter made passes over the drainage south of the clearing. The crew reported nothing obvious, no bright clothing, no smoke, and no movement in open areas. They did note tire tracks on a narrow spur road, but the tracks could not be dated with confidence. Investigators never confirmed whether those tracks belonged to a forest worker, a poacher, or someone connected to Daniel. On day 5, a light rain came through, and it softened the soil enough to reveal older impressions. Nora found a boot print near the clearing that looked similar to Daniel's tread pattern, then measured it carefully. Nearby was a second print that appeared larger, and it crossed the first at an angle that suggested interception. Some locals claimed this was proof of an ambush, but state records warned against drawing conclusions from partial prints. Melissa spent that night at her desk, reviewing dispatch logs and her own field notes line by line. She noticed something odd. The clearing was never mentioned in older trail reports she had read during training. Archive notes from 2011 described the same region as thick brush with no open spaces. Investigators never confirmed when the trees were removed, but the lack of regrowth suggested it happened recently. The sheriff's office pulled satellite images, and a technician compared late summer shots with older winter coverage. A pale rectangle appeared in the newer image, faint but consistent with exposed soil in the right location. The older image showed continuous canopy, which implied the clearing did not exist the previous year. Records conflict on the exact month it appeared, since cloud cover obscured several dates in the available archive. Melissa returned to the clearing with Nora and the deputy, focusing on the stone ring again. They probed the ground with thin rods, checking for buried metal, trash, or anything that sounded unnatural. At one spot, the rod hit something solid, and they dug carefully until a corner of plywood surfaced. Beneath it was an empty cavity, rectangular and dry, as if it had been sealed from rain for a while. Inside the cavity, they found a single item, Daniel's motel keycard, scratched and bent. There was no wallet, no phone, no camera, and no clothing, just that small piece of plastic. The deputy photographed it in place, then bagged it, and dispatch logs show evidence pickup recorded that afternoon. Investigators never confirmed how a motel key ended up under plywood in a forest clearing with no listed purpose. When the news reached town, rumors traveled faster than the official updates. Some locals claimed the clearing was used for illegal meetings, while others said it was a staging site for theft. A few insisted it was connected to an old disappearance, though county file from 2009 did not mention any similar structure. Melissa kept her statements limited, and she repeated that facts were still being gathered and cross-checked. A week later, the search shifted from rescue to recovery, and fewer volunteers showed up each morning. Nora continued to walk the grid, checking small ravines and culverts, then marking spots where water pooled. Melissa reviewed state records for missing persons in the region and found 2 unresolved cases within 10 years. Investigators never confirmed a link, yet the overlap in locations kept the clearing on the active list of concerns. In early November, a hunter reported a camera strap snagged high in a cedar branch near a creek crossing. The strap matched Daniel's camera brand, but the camera itself was not found nearby. Melissa noted that the strap's buckle was unbroken, which suggested it had been removed rather than torn away by force. Records conflict on whether the strap was sun-faded, since one report described it as new and another called it weathered. The final official search day ended with Melissa walking alone into the clearing at dusk. She photographed the stone ring one more time, then looked at the straight edges where trees had been cut clean. Her report stated only what was observable, a new clearing, organized markers, and evidence placed in ways that did not fit accidents. Investigators never confirmed what happened to Daniel Rourke, and the clearing remained an unexplained fact in the county file. Next story. The fire was cold. In the winter of 2019, a park ranger vanished near Silverton, and the report read like a mistake nobody corrected. Ranger Mason Klein was 34, a seasonal law enforcement ranger assigned to backcountry patrols near the old mining roads. He was in the area to check a locked gate line and confirm fresh trespass tracks after a storm. Dispatch logs later showed he signed out a truck, a radio, and a single flare kit. He told a coworker he would be back before dark, then he drove alone into the timber. State records list the weather as clear, yet archived notes mention wind that made trees click like loose glass. 2 days earlier, a hiker named Lauren Finch, 29, had filed a routine statement with the visitor center staff. She worked as an ER nurse from Albuquerque and was taking a 4-day break in the mountains. She said she saw smoke low in a drainage, but the smell was wrong, reportedly more like wet stone. She gave a rough direction, then left town before anyone followed up. That detail sat in a county file from 2009 style folder, the kind that gets reopened when nobody wants blame. On the morning Mason disappeared, a plow operator radioed that he saw fresh tire marks heading toward an unmaintained spur. Investigators never confirmed whether the marks matched the ranger truck because records conflict on the tread type. Mason reached a point where snow drifted over the road, then he parked and continued on foot. His boot prints were found crossing a narrow creek, then angling uphill toward thick spruce. Search teams measured stride and weight shift, and they said he was not running. Some locals claimed he was following another set of prints, but the photos show only one clear track line. At 4:10 p.m., dispatch called Mason for a status check and got only a carrier tone. At 4:18 p.m., he keyed the mic for less than a second, then released it without speaking. That open mic event appears in the dispatch logs, but no audio survived in the system archive. Another ranger drove up the access road at dusk and found Mason's truck still locked. The heater was off, the keys were gone, and the windshield had a clean, wiped circle as if someone looked through it. A half-used bottle of water sat on the seat, and the cap was tightened all the way down. Search and rescue crews arrived after midnight, moving by headlamp with quiet snow falling through the beam edges. They located Mason's footprints again, then lost them where the slope steepened and the wind had scoured the surface. A canine team worked the next morning and pulled toward a shallow draw with deadfall. There, they found the flare kit bag torn open, yet every flare was still inside. One glove was on the ground, palm up, and it had no blood or tearing. The glove was photographed, tagged, and later logged in state records as not matching any injury pattern. By day 3, the search expanded outward, using grid lines and helicopter sweeps across ridges. A flight crew reportedly saw a small dark patch near a boulder field, then lost it behind cloud shadow. Ground teams reached that spot and found only wet ash, scattered in a shallow ring. There was no active flame, no charred wood, and no burn scar on the surrounding needles. The ash was cold to the touch, according to an archived note from the incident commander. Investigators never confirmed what burned there because samples were misplaced during transfer to a lab. The strange part was the odor, described in multiple statements as metallic and damp, like a cold stove. A deputy from Durango wrote that it clung to his gloves after he bagged debris. Another ranger said it was gone within an hour, as if the air turned over and erased it. Records conflict on wind direction, though the nearest weather station showed steady flow from the west. Some locals claimed old mine vents could push air in unusual patterns, but investigators never confirmed any vent nearby. They did confirm that the nearest abandoned shaft was sealed and it sat more than a mile away. Lauren's earlier smoke report resurfaced when her name appeared in the call log at the visitor center. A clerk had written her description on a sticky note, then filed it with other small complaints. That note was later copied into archived notes, but the original went missing. When detectives contacted her, she said the smoke seemed to drift downward, not rise, and that stuck with them. She also said she felt heat on her face for a moment, then it was gone. She never claimed anything supernatural, yet her phrasing made the timeline harder to square with the weather. On day 5, teams found Mason's radio clipped to a branch at shoulder height, antenna pointed straight down. The radio was still on the correct channel, and the battery showed more than half charge. There was no sign it had been dropped in a fall because the casing had no fresh scuffs. A technician later wrote that the push-to-talk button was slightly jammed, but not enough to explain a silent transmission. Dispatch logs showed one more brief key at 4:18 p.m. and then nothing again. That radio detail fueled disagreement because records conflict on whether it was recovered intact or cleaned first. A week into the search, a volunteer crew discovered a shallow trench in the snow beside a log, as if someone had tried to shelter. Inside were pine boughs snapped cleanly, laid in a flat mat without dirt or needles ground into them. No food wrappers were present, and no fire pit was found beside it. A boot heel mark appeared near the edge, but it could not be cast due to melting. A note in the county file from 2009 style archive suggested hypothermia behavior, yet it also said the shelter looked deliberate. Investigators never confirmed whether Mason built it because no fingerprints survived the wet thaw. Around the same time, a private landowner reported hearing two pops like distant wood splitting late at night. Deputies visited and found nothing, but they recorded the call because of the missing ranger case number. Some locals claimed it sounded like flares, but Mason's flare kit was still full and the seals were unbroken. Another explanation was target shooting, yet the access roads were closed and snowed in. State records later showed no other vehicles entered, but those records conflict with a single trail camera image. The image showed headlights behind trees, though the date stamp was smeared and unreadable. When the sheriff's office reviewed that trail camera, an analyst wrote that the light pattern looked like a truck idling, then moving slowly. The file was saved to an evidence drive, but archive notes show it was later overwritten by training footage. Investigators never confirmed why that happened, and no one was disciplined. A ranger supervisor said the camera belonged to a private hunting lease, not an official system. The leaseholder denied changing anything, but he also refused to hand over the original SD card. That refusal sits in the county file from 2009 style stack, alongside other dead ends. 2 months later, snowmelt exposed a strip of fabric snagged on a thorny sapling near the ash ring site. It matched the color of Mason's uniform undershirt, but there was no tag, and DNA results were inconclusive. A button from his outer jacket was later found downhill, pressed into mud like it had been stepped on. The button was cataloged in state records, then misplaced before a second analysis. Some locals claimed the terrain could scatter gear in a slide, yet the slope angle was below typical avalanche ranges. Investigators never confirmed any slide path because the trees were too dense to show clear movement scars. The case turned quieter, then stranger, when an equipment audit flagged Mason's truck as having extra miles. Those miles appeared after the day he disappeared, yet the truck had remained in impound. The mechanic who ran the diagnostic reportedly said the data could be corrupted, or it could be from a battery change. Records conflict on whether the truck battery was replaced during evidence processing. A deputy wrote that the odometer reading was photographed, but the photo file could not be located later. In archive notes, the incident commander added a line saying the truck smelled faintly of smoke, then crossed it out. In the summer of 2020, a backpacker found a small metal object in a creek bend and turned it in. It was Mason's badge clip, bent but not broken, with grit packed into the spring. The backpacker said it was wedged under a rock like it had been placed there. Investigators never confirmed placement because water flow can pin objects in odd ways. The creek bend was downstream from where Mason's footprints first crossed, which fit an accidental loss. It did not fit the ash ring, which sat uphill in the opposite direction. A retired ranger from Ouray County reviewed the case files and focused on timing around 4:10 p.m. He noted the sun dropped behind the ridgeline early, pushing shade into the drainage long before official sunset. That shade could make someone misjudge distance, and it could also hide thin ice over running water. Yet Mason's track line showed steady pace, and there was no sign of stumbling. Some locals claimed he knew the area too well to make a basic mistake, but experience does not prevent bad luck. Investigators never confirmed any fall site, even after repeated sweeps with dogs. Another theory centered on illegal activity, because the region had a history of small-scale theft at abandoned mines. Deputies checked for fresh tool marks at gates, and they questioned a few known trespassers in town. None of those interviews produced charges, and state records show the leads were dropped for lack of evidence. Still, some locals claimed they saw an unfamiliar man at a gas station that week buying propane and leaving quickly. The station camera system had been down, and the clerk could not provide a plate number. That claim remained unconfirmed, but it kept showing up in archive notes whenever the case was reopened. In the fall of 2021, a controlled burn was scheduled in a nearby unit, and staff returned to the drainage for scouting. They found a second ash patch, smaller than the first, tucked behind a fallen trunk. Again, there was no burn scar on the soil and no char on surrounding wood. A ranger wrote that the ash looked like it had been sifted very fine and spread by hand. Samples were collected correctly this time, according to dispatch logs and chain forms. The lab report came back, listing mostly mineral residue, reportedly consistent with burned treated lumber or composite material. Investigators never confirmed any source of such material in that area. The phrase that kept resurfacing was the one from Lauren's statement, "The fire was cold." It was repeated in interviews, in a volunteer briefing, and in a sheriff memo that later leaked to local reporters. Officials pushed back, saying cold ash does not prove anything, and that the phrase invited speculation. Still, dispatch logs show 3 separate callers reported smelling smoke on days when no lightning or burn permits existed. Those calls came from different trailheads, separated by miles, which made coordination unlikely. Records conflict on whether any patrol followed up because staffing was thin and priorities shifted. Some locals claimed the smell always faded when they tried to track it, but that is not something investigators could document. In the winter of 2023, a new sheriff reviewed the county file from 2009-style archive and ordered a full inventory. That audit confirmed several items were missing, including the original sticky note and one evidence photo set. The report also confirmed that Mason's phone was never recovered, despite repeated searches with metal detectors. A state record entry noted that his bank account showed no activity after the day he vanished. There were no confirmed sightings, no travel records, and no later use of his identification. The only movement in the case file was the periodic reprinting of the same dispatch logs, stapled on top like a reminder. When people in Silverton talk about Mason now, they stick to practical details and avoid dramatic wording. They mention the locked truck, the radio on the branch, and the ash that did not match any normal campfire. They also mention that the drainage is quiet in winter because snow absorbs sound and makes distance hard to judge. Investigators never confirmed foul play, and they never confirmed an accident, leaving both in the open. Some locals claimed the mountain keeps what it chooses, but that line never appears in state records. What does appear is a final entry, a missing ranger, last known moving uphill towards smoke that should have been warm. Next story. The logbook ended midline. In late October, a park ranger in western Washington opened a backcountry logbook and felt his stomach tighten fast. The ranger was Dana Klein, 41, a field supervisor assigned to the Olympic National Forest corridor near Forks. With him that morning was Mia Torres, 33, a seasonal ranger with search training and a habit of careful notes. They were there because a missing person report had come in overnight, then multiplied across dispatch logs by sunrise. The missing hiker was Ethan Rowe, 28, a wildlife photographer from Tacoma who wanted foggy elk shots. According to state records, Ethan signed a trail register near the Hoh River corridor just before dusk, then vanished. Some locals claimed he planned to camp near an old maintenance cabin, but investigators never confirmed that detail. Records conflict on his exact route because his rental car was spotted in 2 different pullouts by 2 callers. County deputies treated it as a standard overdue hiker call, then escalated after phone pings stopped abruptly. Dispatch logs showed Dana was notified at 6:12 a.m., then asked to check the nearest backcountry structures first. By mid-morning, Dana and Mia drove a slick gravel road toward a cabin marked only on internal staff maps. Rain came down steady, and the tree line held low fog that made distances feel wrong and hard to judge. The cabin sat in a small clearing beside alder brush with a rusted fire ring and a split log bench. It was a seasonal shelter for crews, and it kept a paper logbook for safety checks and brief work notes. Archive notes described it as boring and reliable, a place that rarely saw visitors outside staffed projects. Dana found the door latched from inside, but the jamb was warped, so he worked it open with a shoulder. Inside, the air smelled like damp pine and old propane, and a cold stove held a pan stained black. Mia photographed the room while Dana checked corners, then called the situation in to the county dispatcher. There was no gear pile, no sleeping bag, and no trash that suggested someone recently stayed there overnight. On a shelf near the window sat the logbook, swollen with moisture, its cover stamped with a faded emblem. Dana opened it and saw clean handwriting from crew leads, then a newer entry dated 2024. The last page started with a normal line about trail washouts, then stopped midline as if the pen quit. The sentence ended on a half-written word, and the ink pooled slightly as if the writer paused suddenly. Mia noted the page felt tacky, not soaked, and a small grit pattern marked the margin like sand rubbed. They photographed everything, sealed the book in a bag, and stepped back outside to listen for movement. No voices carried through the trees, only wind and rain on cedar needles and the distant churn of river water. Dana radioed that the cabin showed no obvious sign of Ethan, but the logbook entry looked wrong and urgent. Investigators later wrote that the cabin logbook was not evidence of a crime, but it changed the search tone. Searchers canvassed the area in widening rings, marking boot prints, snapped branches, and every scrap of fabric. A K-9 team reportedly alerted near the fire ring, then lost the scent at the edge of thick salal brush. State records show a faint footprint track led downhill, but rain destroyed it before a cast could be made. Mia documented a cigarette butt near the bench, though Ethan was described by friends as someone who never smoked. County File from 2009 noted transients sometimes used the same cabin during hunting season quietly. That detail brought in another theory, that Ethan encountered someone sheltering there and left fast for safety. Some locals claimed they heard arguing that night, but investigators never confirmed the time or exact location. Dispatch logs show a separate call at 9:40 p.m. about a flashlight moving deep in timber miles off trail. The caller was a contractor driving home, and he said the light moved in short bursts, then dropped low. When deputies followed up, his estimate placed the light near a steep ravine cut by runoff channels and slick roots. Dana and Mia hiked that ridge the next day with 2 volunteers using flagging tape to keep tight lines. They found torn alder leaves and 1 fresh scuff mark on a wet rock, but no blood, no clothing, no pack. Mia spotted a camera strap imprint in mud near a stump, yet rain softened the edges until it was useless. Dana logged the location anyway, then asked for a drone, but cloud cover and rain grounded flight operations. By the 3rd day, the search expanded to include the riverbank because drowning is common in that corridor. Teams walked the Hoh River edge, checking log jams and undercuts where a current can pin a person silently. Reportedly, a volunteer found a single nitrile glove snagged on driftwood, but no one could link it to Ethan. Records conflict on whether the glove was photographed, where found, or moved to a bag before pictures were taken. That small procedural gap became a problem later because it weakened the chain of observations in reports. While crews searched, Dana returned to the cabin to check for anything missed, especially around the logbook shelf. He noticed a shallow scratch on the inside of the window frame, like a pry mark made by a thin metal edge. Mia reportedly found a matching scrape on the exterior trim, but forest maintenance records show older repairs there. Investigators never confirmed whether those marks were new, though they were logged in archive notes afterward. Dana also found a folded map behind a loose plank printed from a public website and creased hard at corners. It highlighted a route that cut cross-country to a decommissioned spur road, avoiding the main trail entirely. No name was written on it, and fingerprints were not recovered due to wet paper and handling before bagging. Still, the map suggested someone planned movement in that area, and that idea changed how deputies interviewed people. One interview focused on a man named Caleb Hart, 37, an out-of-work roofer camping from his truck. Caleb admitted he stayed in the cabin 2 nights earlier, but he said he left before Ethan arrived. He reportedly described the logbook, then claimed he never wrote in it because he did not want a paper trail. Deputies checked his phone location, but records conflict because his device was powered off for long stretches. Caleb was not charged, and state records show he cooperated, though his statements shifted on small timing details. Another lead came from a park volunteer who said he saw Ethan on the trail, stopping often to listen for elk. The volunteer recalled Ethan carrying a tripod and a small, hard case, likely for camera lenses, taped shut. Searchers never found the hard case, which mattered because a heavy case usually does not disappear without trace. Some locals claimed thieves target photographers, but investigators never confirmed robberies matching Ethan in that area. The search entered its second week, and the weather turned colder, with night temperatures dipping near 3 degrees. Dana briefed crews using dispatch logs, then reduced search grids to the most probable travel corridors and hazards. Mia stayed focused on documentation because small inconsistencies can grow into false certainty when stories spread. They kept returning to the logbook entry, not for mysticism, but because it suggested interruption and urgency. The handwriting did not match any crew lead on file, and the ink type was not standard for ranger stations. A lab report reportedly said the ink was common gel ink, black, sold widely, and not traceable to a batch. The half-written word ended with letters that could be read as try or tras, depending on light angle. Records conflict on the reading, with one deputy writing trail and another writing trespass in separate documents. Investigators never confirmed the intended word, and that uncertainty kept the entry from becoming a clean clue. Dana asked staff to check archive notes for any prior logbook oddities at that cabin, and Mia did the review. She found a mention in a county file from 2009 about log pages removed during a vandalism incident. That incident involved teenagers, not violence, but it showed the cabin logbook had been tampered with before. Still, there was no record of midline endings, just crude drawings and torn paper that rangers replaced later. Mia reported the pattern as rare, then asked whether anyone had recently restocked supplies, including pens and paper. Maintenance logs show a restock in early October, but the restock list did not include writing tools explicitly. A week later, a hunter reportedly found Ethan's hat near a stream crossing, wedged under a root in shallow water. The hat matched photos on Ethan's social media, but investigators never confirmed ownership through serial markings or DNA. Still, state records show the find narrowed the search area back toward the ravine, and the decommissioned spur road is less than #0. 5# is greater than. Dana requested another sweep of the ravine, and this time they brought rope teams and a technical rescue unit. They moved slowly because rocks were slick, and a misplaced boot could send someone down the same drop Ethan faced. At the bottom, they found a torn strip of blue fabric on a thorn branch, but no matching garment recovered nearby. A deputy photographed it, bagged it, then later noted the color looked different under station lighting, which complicated reports. Records conflict on whether the fabric matched Ethan's jacket color described by family, because descriptions varied by witness. As the month ended, the search shifted into limited operations, meaning fewer boots, fewer hours, and slower updates. Mia kept calling county offices for paperwork because missing person cases often hide a key detail in mundane files. She found a report of a traffic stop on the spur road 2 nights after Ethan vanished, involving a different vehicle. The driver was warned for a broken taillight, and he said he was scouting hunting spots, then left without issue. Investigators never confirmed a link, but the stop mattered because it proved someone used that closed route at night. Dana interviewed the driver, who claimed he saw no one, yet admitted he noticed fresh footprints near a washed-out culvert. He said the prints looked like trail runners, not boots, and they led into brush, then disappeared in rock. That detail fit Ethan, who reportedly wore lightweight shoes, but it also fit many hikers who ignore rules. Records conflict on whether the driver mentioned the footprints during the stop or only during the later interview. The dispatcher who wrote the original stop notes did not include footprints, which made the late addition suspicious to some. As winter approached, Dana made one last visit to the cabin, partly to winterize supplies, partly to close a loop. He found the logbook shelf empty, because the book was held in evidence, but the space looked freshly wiped clean. Mia reportedly noticed a faint bleach smell, though no cleaning supplies were logged at the cabin in state records. Investigators never confirmed who cleaned it, and maintenance crews denied doing anything beyond normal stove checks. Dana documented the smell anyway, because in these cases, ordinary details sometimes matter more than dramatic ones. In January, a storm knocked trees across roads, delaying follow-ups, and the case settled into a quiet file status. Ethan remained missing, and his family kept asking about the logbook because it felt like a message that stopped short. County deputies responded carefully, saying the entry could have been written by anyone at any time with no proof. They cited dispatch logs and state records, explaining that the search found no confirmed sign of a struggle or abduction. Some locals claimed the forest swallows people, but investigators never confirmed patterns beyond the normal risks of terrain. 2 months later, a volunteer group reportedly found Ethan's tripod leg near the river, scratched deep and bent. The find was logged, but records conflict on the exact shoreline location because 2 teams reported different GPS points. That inconsistency made it harder to reconstruct movement, and it opened questions about whether the item was moved. Investigators never confirmed if the tripod leg washed downstream or was carried and discarded closer to the cabin. Dana added the detail to archive notes, then closed the season report with the same cautious language he used throughout. The cabin logbook remains cataloged in county storage, and the last line still ends in the middle of a word. No official conclusion ties Ethan to the cabin, yet the timing keeps the entry inside the case narrative permanently. Some locals claimed the writer was Ethan, others claimed it was Caleb, and others blamed an unknown third person. Investigators never confirmed any author, and records conflict on small observations that might have resolved it early. What remains, according to state records, is a missing photographer, a wet forest, and a sentence that stopped midline.